Welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham. Yeah, it's just me. So I did do a video a couple of days ago, a live video, so link somewhere, and it was a modern mystic video, so really just an argument against glibism. But he did frame it as a kind of Buddhist kind of bullshit of just get along with whatever the system is. So no matter what, whatever you're born into, somehow just roll, okay, with whatever that is, and play the circle of life game, whatever the game is, blah, 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 blah. And therefore you won't be stressed because you'll just be a dumb animal being abused by an evolutionary process, and that's somehow a great victory. No, big failure. Yeah. So, and then the comments tended towards some idea that somebody has made some sort of video somewhere that I need to respond to because there's some sort of argument. And the only ones listed were basically just nihilist arguments that, again, pretend there's no value to be concerned about. That is, there's no welfare stakes that are real, okay, in any kind of description of the game we're playing, being living things, which, as I did state in the video, is an impossible argument to make to somebody who's conscious. Now, you might be able to fool AI or something, but you're not going to fool a consciousness into believing it doesn't matter whether they're tortured, okay, or comforted, that the two outcomes are exactly the same. Yeah, no, they're not the same outcome. There's a value difference between the outcomes of torture and comfort, or bliss, however you want to describe having fun, versus not having fun. And yes, and the value, it's just value. I know it's value. I know it's value because I automatically value it. I can't help but value it because it's overtly what it is. Pain is overtly nasty and horrible and suitably described as bad or negative or, don't do it. And pleasure is exactly the opposite. It is wonderful relief and, it's fantastic, and it's all value. There's no way to describe it in any other terms than good and bad, or plus and minus, or profit and loss, or some kind of terminology that implies implicit value. So I'll waste the next hour, trying to argue those themes. I suppose the first subject is sort of the same subject about who you're arguing with, and the fact that, humans are so deranged in their delusionment, that there's such a variety of bizarre and silly narratives by which people live by, the silly notions in their head of accomplishment or purpose, and even their definition of value, their inability to see the obvious for many of them, which is that, every organism that's doing this see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, feel it thing has a substantial stake in feeling good rather than feeling bad. That in every case where a brain is capable of being tormented, that there's something to be concerned for. Irrationally, it would be imbecilic for a brain not to realize that. So you have to, whatever tricks you have to play to get yourself to understand the perspective. But I mean, if you and a dog were the only two things on Earth, you'd certainly be able to figure out pretty quick that, you should take care of the dog. That there's only these two things to worry about, and so it's not overwhelming. And you know that your interests are important. The dog might even know that your interests are important. And there shouldn't be any real difficulty in figuring out that you should find win-win circumstances where you both end up feeling good, and avoid where you both feel bad, and that would be sensible. So it just basically, the simple argument that it's not a single-player game, and the simple argument is too many players are horribly destroyed, and and you don't have to feel their pain, which makes it a lot easier for you to glibly say there's some kind of point or purpose. So, as I have many times argued, okay, to little avail, little persuasion, which I don't really understand, all the people, stoking the fires of existence are people who haven't had the worst of it yet. They haven't died. They haven't been murdered yet. And, they're basically arguing that murder is worth it, that it's going to be okay. Not a big deal. And it has every appearance, from my perspective, to be a gigantic deal. I don't want to spend 7 hours being tormented into my demise. I don't want to spend 7 days. I certainly don't want to spend 7 months or 7 years struggling to survive with some horrid, debilitating misery. No, that's not a price I want to be paying. I certainly wouldn't pay for a future or for the past. Now, whether I'd pay it just to avoid having to deal with being dead, just because it's something you naturally resist is your destruction. Yeah, but I don't think, I'm just saying, I think I'll find some other way than the 7-year plan. I'll try to figure something better out than that. But anyway, and certainly I would choose it if I had the liberty to freely choose. I certainly wouldn't choose to drag it out. When it certainly is inevitable, especially when you become my age. If one thing doesn't kill you, something else will be. It's going to show up, and so you can have more than one death scene. You can squander that torture and torment. Keep thinking you're going to win when you can't win, and that's just the fact. You're not going to win. You're not going to defeat the plan that evolution has for you, or nature, or physics, or however you want to describe it. You're doomed, and the question is, should you doom anything else to have to face that, and endure that, and deal with that? And the simple argument is, why would you do that? It's cruel and stupid and ignorant and ugly and disgusting. You're putting a contract out on your baby. I mean, that's all you're doing. You're just, when you say signing it up for living, you're signing it up for dying. And that's a pretty bold fucking thing to do to something. Signing it up to be murdered. I mean, it should be persuasive to anybody reasonable, in my opinion. A reasonable person should be able to calculate that, yeah, I wouldn't want to be put in that position. Yeah, it's not going to be worth it. So anyway, the argument really shouldn't be that complicated if it just stays a scientific argument. So I guess that's part of how I would argue the case. Is that if you are of a scientific mind and logic and reasoning appeals to you, then you have to look at the fact of what evolution is, that it does just make tool-enabled monstrosities, that most of the living organisms are living lives that are either, I don't know what you'd call a victim of a vampire, but you're either going to be the victim or you're going to be the vampire. And there's no other role to play except being in those, predator or prey. And, these are the only things that are are created by evolution. Our defensive systems are, aggressive stealing mechanisms, and nothing else functions outside of that framework or that blueprint. There's just tool-enabled gladiators fighting to preserve a DNA signature, that just says silly things like how long your eyebrows are going to be, or it's all this little mush that doesn't mean much, superficial crap. Yeah, it's just what for. Why keep making gladiators to fight a stupid fight for no victory? And just to create a bunch of needs that likely will not be completely satisfied, and in which there's more likelihood that they'll be tragically and horribly unsatisfied, and there'll be great regrets and great laments and great dissatisfaction with the state of people's position, and there'll be much compromising in people's ethics and integrity to stay alive. They'll steal money from their grandmother. They'll do all kinds of things because survival requires it, or comfort requires it. And that's the world. It's full of a lot of bad play, a lot of games being played that aren't good games. There's 2 million people in jail, and there probably should be 200 million. If there was a true justice system, there's so much graft and dishonesty and putrid, rude behavior being perpetrated by these humans that people think the universe needs. That their presence is vitally important, and now it's vitally unimportant. It can't serve a single purpose. And again, it's just a logical argument that we don't rescue anything by existing. We don't show up and save the day. There's not some, the Martians aren't tied up on a railroad track somewhere. No, they just don't exist. Okay, and us creating them won't solve any problem. There's no problems until one of these feeling things shows up and starts going ouch and starts going I want and I need. That's when the problem starts. And so, as pointed out in the video, the people make up these silly stories to paste over that science, like Buddhism, and say things like, well, life is suffering, but they really don't mean that it's just a long, arduous struggle for no accomplishment, because that would be just totally undefendable. So they mean something else. Who knows what it is, but it isn't what it sounds like, because if it was what it sounded like, then you would say the obvious thing that, well, quit making more of them then. But they don't say that. I mean, that's not the message. The message isn't abstain from making humans or animals or any other sentient thing to be murdered eventually. Quit doing that. It's a stupid game to play. Musical chairs to the death is not something you play at a kid's birthday party. It's just not. It's not reasonable behavior. It's not something reasonable to endorse as behavior. And it's exactly the opposite, I guess, is the point, is that it's just cruel and ignorant and bizarrely insensitive, and what would inspire you to think there was a good purpose in it? And the only thing that inspires people is grotesque ignorance. I mean, stupidity that you can, that's just so, it's so heavy with dumb in terms of what they think the truth is. Some silly stories about heavens and hells and gods with purpose and with mysterious ways of somehow making purpose out of just torment and doom and dread and terror and torture. There's no purpose in any of that shit. And Buddhism does the same thing. Apparently there's some framework that forbids the simple solution, which is wear a condom, and suggesting that other people do likewise. And instead, there's some notion of, your personal escape just requires you to jump into a fire, which, again is, it's so ridiculous. It's so unscientific as an answer. Anybody reasonably would say, how could they ever fall for that as a solution? I mean, why would you want a solution that only fixes the problem for you? I mean, if you have any kind of integrity as a human, you must have sympathy for other brain-enabled beings, your fellow humans and fellow critters and creatures that inhabit this planet with you. But you'd have to be a insidious bit of monster not to be able to understand that you could, you can feel some portion of their pain, in terms of you can be reasonably empathetic and recognize you're just being lucky or fortunate that you don't have to endure the fates that they endure. Why would you leave your own clones? You have to sort of think of them that way, your own brother and sister, to die on the Titanic. You have to be a pretty rotten person to do that. And that's the assumption of Buddhism, is this assumption that somehow you don't care what happens to everybody else, that you're just going to jump the ship, jump in your fire, and be free and liberated. Now, obviously, it's even more unscientific in the sense that you have to believe in some reincarnating soul or something to believe any of that crap has anything to do with anything, that somehow you are going to be protected when there isn't any you, and you know it. I mean, you weren't born on this earth, fully functional and knowledgeable and in remembrance of all the past lessons you learned and all that kind of crap. We weren't born with some kind of mental character. All of that was developed by the instruments that interacted with you. Whether you had a little spinning toy above your crib or didn't. Whether you had a twin sister that, hit you with pillows. Who knows what it takes to make you into who you are, or what did make you into who you are. But it wasn't karma, and it wasn't your past life, and it wasn't any of that babble. And so again, it's such a rejection of a reasonable understanding that evolution built us, okay, and we're just tool enabled. The tool is a brain. It makes perfectly good sense that this would be an evolved tool once you had the capacity to put neurons together and make these quick reflexes, that the reflexes would pile on top of each other and check each other and counterbalance each other and, create some kind of instrument that would be doing these calculations about what the right answer is, how to react, and to react in some way that defeats your adversary. And so that's why we have brains, and it's why we feel, is to augment the function of the brain learning what's good for you and what's bad for you. So the sensations give you a base understanding of what needs to happen, that your body not be penetrated or punched or impacted in negative ways and bruised and pieces torn off and all that stuff. And so it gives you these sensations to avoid the damage that you would do if you didn't feel those pains. Fact. Again. And you know, that's like leprosy. It's, you know, just an insidious example of what goes wrong when you don't have that proper mechanism anymore, and you just inadvertently tear yourself to pieces, scratching itches when you can't feel that you're scratching too much. Anyway, you know, just all the, you know, when you look back at all the horror that people have had to endure, it's just, you know, and you can't even absorb it in any way. You know, can you, you know, do justice to the, you know, how many people have died so many horrible deaths, and you know, what a price has been paid, and what do we do with it? You know, what's the, you know, what's the golden chalice or whatever? What's the thing, this holy grail thingy that we're, you know, pursuing? What do we? What's the accomplishment that you've paid that high a price for? And you're not going to be able to name anything that does any justice at all and makes any sense out of all that torment wasted, you know, squandered, to just keep on struggling to play I win games, you know, where you get to say I win for 10 minutes and then you get murdered. You know, no point in it. Too silly. Too crazy. But the only people that will understand that argument are, you know, apparently people who have in some way felt it and, you know, rose to it through the fact that they have experienced some of that pain and suffering, and know there's no victory that's worth it. There's no accomplishment that's worth it. And maybe they've lived long enough to know that even the stuff that you could argue is enjoyable and fun is only that because of this ego, this perverse I must be the winner contest thing, this competitive crap that lives inside of us. And that is a pretty ugly reason, a pretty ugly cause of your attachment to the game, is because you can play it and you can declare yourself a winner in it. You know, and that's good enough? No, that's a shallow, as they say, victory. So, I'll take a pause and do some more of this. Lamenting, mostly. Because it is hard to imagine. I mean, frankly, it just gets... it gets harder and harder to understand normals, you know, the older I get, you know, because it just all gets so clear how insidiously stupid it is to create one of these machines, to struggle for these shallow victories. And they're just so shallow. I mean, how many times have I pointed out, and look at all the stuff we make celebrity out of. People that look good. Well, obviously, that's not very merit pay, you know, that's lucky. And then people who spent a whole bunch of time doing some silly thing to practice it over and over and over to be an expert at, you know, jumping over a hoop or through a hoop. You know, and that's almost like every, you know, all the games are built that way. There's just nothing valuable in any of them. They're not skills that we should be advancing in human beings. I mean, the things we should be rewarding in our society obviously should be people who are productive and constructive and inventive and produce something new and interesting, not play a 200-year-old game, and you know, hit a couple of extra home runs. Just too ridiculous when you think about it. It's just all soap opera, and it all has to do with this living vicariously in terms of hero worship and pretending that somehow I could have been a contender or something. Some kind of thought that by watching somebody else do it, that somehow you're doing it, whatever the fantasy is. It's just such stupid and moronic psychology that everybody should be able to diagnose themselves as being kind of insane to think any of that crap is important. It's just a perpetually run soap opera, and nothing new ever happens. They just do the same crap. They drop it, and then they pick it up, and then they drop it, and then they pick it up. And somehow these human morons are interested in watching this process, the great victory of the picking it up, and the great failure of, oh, it's dropped again. It's just too ridiculously stupid. All right, so I'll be back. Alright, back. So I probably should make a distinction between the two arguments being made. I mean, one argument is what do you do with people that are already alive? And the other argument is what is the ethics or reasonableness of making living things? And so the substance of the argument isn't against the living, it's against making living things. That there's no purpose or function, no good can come of it, okay, because it is just a struggle to lose. It's a battle that can't be won. There's no war victory. There's no, first of all, there's no adversary except the very instruments that keep you motivated and in need, the quicksand, and you're sinking in it, and you just struggle to reduce the burden of the how bad it's going to be, whether you're just going to seep in it or whether you're going to sink in it and suffocate. And that gets more serious as you get older, because yes, it gets clearer and clearer that you're not going to win, and that it's going to overcome you. And but while you're young, you're feeling like maybe you're ice skating on the quicksand, and it's okay, but you can understand that that's just a delusion of a false sense of immunity, because the odds are a little better, but it doesn't mean that the hammer's not going to fall. It's just that it doesn't look like it's going to fall today, and that's all you're living in, is that delusion that somehow when it falls, it isn't going to be as big a crisis because somehow you'll be in some mood that'll say, I want it to happen. And the only way you could be in that mood is you'd have to be insanely miserable to be in the mood, to be dead. So that's the dilemma for the living, and there's just no point in putting something in that position. So again, I don't have anything but empathy for the living. But it's the creation argument, making living things. That's where there's a criticism and a claim of a trespass against decency, is in that imposition, and saying or rationalizing some excuse to do that imposing, based on some perception that you're winning, therefore it will win. When a little bit of reason applied, you can recognize that nobody wins, that the person living the most splendid life on earth right now is going to be murdered, and may be murdered very badly, over many years, and have everything taken from them, and be even more deprivated by the fact that the more you have, the more you can be attached to, the more you can feel dependent on, the more splendid the moments you have in life, the more you're going to miss them when you can't have them anymore. When it's gone. So that's part of how insidious it is. The more you love, the more painful it's going to be when you lose what you love, or when you see it raped and destroyed. And so, I mean, this isn't that hard to figure out. There's no good reason to put something in that jeopardy. And there's all kinds of good reason to have empathy, though, for human beings struggling to find purpose and meaning and to think they're winning. There's no crime in playing the game while you're alive, because you're built to play it. That's what the biology has constructed you for. And it's not a construction that you can just put a condom on, okay, to disrupt. It's very hard to in some way suppress that physiology that says breathe every 30 seconds or 18 seconds, whatever it is, and to seek and to adjust yourself to be more comfortable. Those are all impulses you can't suppress with any simple fix. You can't make yourself insensitive to your needs and desires, where the outcomes, like having a kid, is easy to prevent. So there's no direct tie between some biological design feature and any necessity that you be harmed to disrupt it, where being competitive or being desirous of performing and strength and power and wanting these things, enjoying advantage, enjoying your strutting, whatever you want to call all that ego stuff, there's no simple fix that extracts that need from you and pulls it out of you and says you no longer are competitive. It just ain't going to happen. You no longer desire. That's like making you unhungry or something. It's not very practical to just think you can wish it away or just roll a condom over it. So again, the argument is about the fact that you're not asking anybody to sacrifice their own life. Nobody's asking anybody to die or to be killed any sooner, than they otherwise would be or will be. So there's no point in saying would be because they will be. And it's all about just when and how. And even that argument, gets to be so depressing, in the sense that the fact is that in some ways, being murdered quickly now could be a great benefit to you than being slowly killed later. And those are just facts that are, horrible to contemplate. Just how insidious, the game that we're playing is, and how we've, because people are so full of delusions and, fairy tales and religious nonsense, that we haven't even dealt with that very important subject in any kind of rational way about economizing and recognizing that, there's no point in lingering, if you're done playing. And so when people are done playing, they should be able to just gracefully get up and not have to play anymore. And they shouldn't have to pay any torturous agony fee to extract themselves from the game. And so we could, eliminate a huge percentage, a huge amount of our human misery by just recognizing that we should let things go when they're ready to go. Without any kind of sense of doing anybody a disservice by recognizing that simple liberty. Obviously, if somebody can't express a desire to live, then they can't really be stated to have one. And there's no reason to contrive some reason to inject one into them, you know, through some guilt or some other mechanism, and try to, you know, force them to get back into the heroin den, you know, the opium or whatever, get re-addicted to playing a game they can't win and won't win. So again, yeah, so there's one subject is what do we do with the fact that we are alive and how to live a decent and efficient and good life, versus the simple question of should you ever do anything to encourage the creation of more living organisms with sentient brains that will just struggle in a, you know, a trap of you know, playing a game they can't win, and are capable of losing so badly, so horrifically, that it should startle you and scare you to be the lucky winner of the worst death you know, ever endured. Do you really want to be in that lottery? You want to pull that number? I don't. Quite sensibly, you know, quite rationally, I decline any passionate desire to be to have somebody buy a ticket for me. Okay, yeah, please, no, thank you. And that's what making living things is. It's just buying them a ticket to an opportunity to be an extraordinarily it's not like they're a bad loser. I mean, losing badly. To lose extraordinarily badly. Yeah. You know, not a nice thing to do to something. To buy the worst death possible ticket for them. Anyway, so let's just make that clarification, which I didn't make very clear, but there are two different arguments. It's not about making some statement about you being an addict. It's almost like the vegetarian argument, you could argue. If you're addicted to eating meat because that's what you've done for your whole life and you just can't conform yourself to the change, it's too hard, then just concede that you're just not up to it. But don't think that gives you license to defend it and say it's the way things should be and it's the way people should be raised and it's a rational thing to do when you know it's all of those things aren't true. So don't come up with some idea that you know are going to reconstruct a defense of what you know to be inefficient at minimum behavior and just recognize that it's wrong. Vote against it where possible and just acknowledge that you're an addict and you would like to be winnowed out. Okay, you'd like to be gracefully exited rather than brutally exited, and just make that argument that yes, you'll do whatever you can to prevent the future from having that addiction, and concede you're just not up to being a good enough person to fix your own inefficient functionality. Just call yourself disabled or dysfunctional. Admit your inefficiency and move on. But don't you know, insidiously try to defend which you know to be stupid and wasteful behavior. So, you people who love living, just recognize that, yeah, it's probably because your psychology is a little bit fucked. You're addicted to, some notion of accomplishment and gratification in your shiny car or some other bullshit, and that all of that is insanely superficial and silly. And don't pretend it's worth imposing on a new sentient brain, that it has to go through this living process and watch all of this horror and learn how to pretend it's not a problem. Because it is. It is waste, and it's stupid, and it's grotesquely bad. And you shouldn't be doing any voting for it. Shouldn't be voting for the continuation of the bad play. Musical chairs to the death is a bad play. Nobody should perform it. Yeah, it's bad. To the torturous death, you have to keep remembering to throw the torture in there. It's really important to the story. Alright, I'll take a pause and reflect. Alright, so summing up. Nihilism, yes, we'll do that as, well, it's not really summing up, right? It's the third subject. But it's just another example of rationalizations, kind of desperate efforts to justify life rather than recognize that, fine, I'm going to live mine, and I'm going to play my delusionary game, but I'm not going to defend imposing it, and regenerating the bad game to be played over and over again. And the difference between those two. So these are the rationalizers, the ones, who resort to something, instead of creating a God or a heaven or a hell, some silly fable to create some sort of notion of a justification, like somehow there's an accomplishment in this mush. They're using just a very fake, wherever I was, I will continue, something like that. Oh, there's my old car again. Anyway, yeah. So nihilism is this idea that somehow people can negate this concern for the welfare of anything on the planet, because somehow it's not material and it's not real, and so it's not a thing to consider. There's no real underlying value, that somehow this is some sort of drawing or a cartoon, or some other abstraction, and therefore nothing is really at stake. Now, obviously, I'm going to just make the simple argument that I can't in any way find any reasonableness in anything like that, because I knew right from the instant I arrived on Earth or became conscious of being here, that there was something vital that was taking place in terms of feelings and having good ones versus bad ones. You automatically know good smells from bad smells, and good taste from bad taste, and good sensations from bad sensations, and all of that. And it's quite obvious that there's conditions to be in, and those conditions are decidedly positive and negative, as stated. Now, the simple leap you make from that simple statement is you live a little bit at a time, a little while, and you figure out that everything else is also a stakeholder, that all of the other things are walking around or doing the same thing you're doing, and they're having these experiences. And you can especially appreciate that for the maybe for the members of your family or something, and if they're not objectionable and if they're not hostile to you and, you know, making your life miserable or something, you would appreciate that you become invested in their welfare also, because if they're happy, you end up being happy. Maybe it's that selfish, but it's just the truth. And so you recognize that you have some, there's some reality to this fact that you have to live your life recognizing that there's these other stakeholders, and it's important that you don't cause somebody else a bunch of grief and pain to avoid grief and pain, or to gain your pleasure. And then you hear about different parts of how civilization worked, and you hear about slavery or some other thing, and you recognize that there's no value in this idiotic notion that some people are less worthy, are less capable of feeling, or some kind of other silly notion. And you just see how this is all just rationalizations that people who have want to keep, so they come up with some silly mechanism to defend what they're doing, their gluttony and their greed, and, you know, some other likely negative cause for why they're contriving this insanely silly philosophy that somehow they know their feelings, how they feel matters. They certainly know when they need the aspirin or the morphine. They certainly know that it does matter, you know, whether their drinking water's poison. And there's just no rational reason for them to think it doesn't matter if somebody else is in jeopardy. It's just silly to think it doesn't matter. Now, obviously, there's a limit to how much you can sacrifice yourself for others, in terms of being able to find purpose and meaning in your own existence. You know, if it's just drudgery and, you know, cleaning up other people's messes, it would be a rather miserable existence. And so there's no limit to how well we can, how efficient we can be as being, recognizing it's not a single player game. So it's not an argument that we are all obligated to be saints. It's just an obligation that you can't rationally defend pretending you don't know that it matters, that all of the brains that can feel are doing the same thing your brain is doing, and that it does make a difference whether those brains are comfortable or uncomfortable. And it's just a fact that it's a value difference. It's bad for bad feelings to be experienced, period. And it doesn't matter whether they're in your brain or they're in somebody else's brain. Feeling bad is bad in and of itself. So again, they're rejecting that obvious logic, and they're doing it because they are vampires, you know, because they are guilty. They need to feed, and they can't freely and liberally feed, you know, if they have to acknowledge that it costs too much, that the price somebody else is paying for their gluttony is too high a price. So it's these gluttons who are nihilists, because they're attempting to defend the high cost of their maintenance. And there's no defense except to pretend maintenance isn't an issue, that it doesn't matter. Torturing things is okay. They have to make torture okay because they intend to inflict more of it than they're worth. And that's the simple truth. They intend to do it. And so they have to contrive a world where that can make sense. And the only world in which that can make sense is a world where there's no such thing as torture except for themselves. Yeah. And that's the big lie. So anyway, so it is just, you know, it's I like to say it's like the worst of the bad philosophies, because there's one thing to be ignorant. You know, there's lots of stupid people that fall for silly stories, you know, hobgoblins and whatnot. And those people aren't falling for a silly story. They're not ignorant of the facts. They're not ignorant of evolution. They're not ignorant of all this stuff. They're willfully and deliberately contriving, you know, a nonsensical story, a religion. They're inventing their own, you know, to evade responsibility for the cost of their gluttony. And that's all it's about. Says I. Okay. So anyway. Alright, so that's probably enough of a video. So I'll keep doing these live videos now and then and see if something comes of it. And if, you know, look, you know, people brought it up. I mean, they think there's some kind of video out there that makes some sort of counter argument. And I just haven't seen any of these counter arguments. So if somebody has somebody knows of some sort of reasonable argument that somehow defends evolution as a process, and can explain why it's worth it to, you know, torture and kill 10 lion cubs to have a lion, you know, yeah, then go ahead, explain how it would be worth it to, you know, if we were living more natural lives, for you to have a wife that has 10 kids and you have to watch 8 of them die. Go ahead, explain to me how that would be worth it. That the natural design is perfectly satisfactory. Go ahead, let me hear that argument. And if you can't contrive it, which you can't, you know, the simple concession is that no, it's defending the natural system is imbecilic. It's unreasonable. It's unscientific. You can only do it with some sort of fable of function, some sort of denial of the basic horror that is the function of making these demonstration models, you know, and obliging them to play some little contest merely to perfect, you know, the blueprint of Gladiator on Earth. And that definition is irrelevant. You know, a million years ago, you know, well, let's say 300 million years ago, the definition was Tyrannosaurus or some other predator, you know, with big teeth. You know, then there was all kinds of, you know, reshaping of that when mammals showed up. And, you know, the definition of a winner's always been some sort of monster. It's just a fact. You know, for a long time, rat was probably the definition of the winner. You know, and it's a horrible definition of a good life. You know, short and brutal. That's, you know, that was a big part of nature's plan. And it's a really dumb plan. And frankly, if you can't get any smarter, what would be the point, right? If you can't gain knowledge and, you know, an improved system of function, you know, if you can't improve your function, isn't it quite dismal an existence that would be longer? Because you can't improve on it. You can't make it better. You can't do it better. And that's probably something that clings us a little more to life, is the very fact that, you know, we can keep seeking and gaining. We can keep acquiring knowledge and information, and that keeps us hungry for tomorrow. So that's just another one of the insidious mechanisms that keep us in the game. And if that was taken away from you, that capacity to improve yourself, wouldn't that be even more dismal a truth to have to live with? Alright, anyway. Just being a cat over and over and over again. You know. So, till the next time, and such and so forth and whatnot. I think that's enough of a video. So we'll see where it goes. Still working on it. Still working on the idea that this argument has to be made in some sort of steps. That first make the argument for the scientific argument versus the delusions and made-up fairy tales and perversions of the facts of our existence. And once you state the facts, then there just isn't much ground for any applause or any kind of sense of, oh, isn't it all so fucking spectacular? When no, it's spectacularly bad. The wasted suffering is just, yeah, incomprehensibly bad. Alright, enough said, I think. So, till the next time, and such and so forth and whatnot. Blah 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 blah. Ah, yeah, there it is. Yeah. Happy balloon. Only a balloon, should have the right to smile. The rest of the thinking things should do it with some humility.